Hey, good morning. I'm Melissa Milhorn, and this is my 5th summit. And late last year, I left federal service after 35 years to join Principles First as its full-time director of operations. So thank you, Elon Musk. So this first panel is going to set the stage for the weekend. We're going to offer a candid assessment of how we got here, structural and cultural forces driving today's instability, and what it all means for American democracy at 250. Governor Pat McCrory served as North Carolina's 74th governor and as the Charlotte's mayor for 7 terms. He also served on the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council under President George W. Bush, and now hosts PBS's, Unspun. Bill Kristol is director of Defending Democracy Together, the editor-at-large of The Bulwark, where he writes the daily Morning Shots newsletter, and he previously served as chief of staff to Vice President Dan Quayle. And leading the panel is Chuck Todd, who spent years moderating NBC's Meet the Press. He served as chief political analyst and White House correspondent for NBC News, and today he hosts the Chuck Toddcast and Sunday Night with Chuck Todd, and yes, he tweets about sports. And they're joined by Principles First Executive Director Brittany Martinez. Please join me in welcoming Bill, Chuck, Brittany, and Governor McCrory.
All right. So we're supposed to answer the question how we got here. So what do we want to take 6 hours, 7 hours to figure out how we got here? I think a good way to start, though, is I'm always curious I always say this, when we're all here because we're not comfortable with what's happening now. And everybody, I tell this to my wife all the time, everybody has a line that's eventually crossed, but we all have, our lines are in different places. You know, for Liz Cheney, it was January 6th was a line, right? We see this. With Marjorie Taylor Greene, it was the Epstein files that were a line. Everybody has a line that sort of got him to this place going, whoa, what are we doing? We've got to restructure this. So I'm going to start that way because I think it's a good way to get at how we got here. So Pat, let me start with you. How did you end up here? What was the line that was crossed for you that you were like, you know what, I'm out?
Well, first of all, I've always been an outsider to any organized group. First of all, if any organized group accepts me, I question them.
There you go. You and Groucho, right? Was it Groucho?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the only Marxism we're quoting up here today. So.
And second, when they do accept me, when I'm around people who all think alike, I've always been a kind of a contrarian. And it's both a strength and a weakness of mine, and I recognize that. So I used to be a Democrat when I was a young man, and then when Reagan ran, I became a Republican. But then when I get around a lot of Republicans, I question them, I challenge them, and I did the same thing with the Democrats. And I was that way as a mayor, and I was that way as governor. I always wanted to be challenged when an idea was presented, so we hear all sides. And what has happened, I think, especially during the last 10 to 15 years, is no one is challenging the groupthink, which is kind of an Orwellian
In
type.
whichever group they're in?
Whichever group they're in, and the purity test that every group has. And through both political parties and media and everything else, we're being segregated into a groupthink very similar to junior high cafeteria table. You know, where you have your cool table, you have your cheerleader table, you have your jock table, you know, you name it. And if you dare change tables, you're challenged. And I'm the type who would go ahead and change the table just for the sake of it. And I don't think we're doing enough of that at this point in time. And the cancel culture now is canceling anyone who dares do that. So mine has been an evolution, to quote Barack Obama. I've evolved on this. And so it wasn't any one moment. But I think people like you are needed now more than ever to challenge the status quo, not from a revolutionary standpoint, but from a standpoint to make sure that all the voices are heard. And especially, the last thing I'll say is the word principle, is that I think we need to put principles ahead of the political party or an individual or ahead of emotions. and start looking at policy for the next generation and a generation like that. So the word principles had a big impact on me when this organization called me in the past month.
Bill, what was your line? When do you remember it was like, all right, you know what, I can't anymore?
Yeah, let me first just say I've been involved with Principles First, I think from the beginning with Heath and then Heath and Brittany. I just want to pay tribute to Heath and Brittany and all your colleagues for the incredible job you've done, and thank you all for coming and being part of the organization as well. And I know many of you have been active in the regional level and some of the meetings there and have been here before. I've seen many of you not here, over in D.C., until we came out to this exotic suburb of whatever this is here in Maryland.
I know,
They
Bill
could
and I have
have
lived here
come
too
to
long.
Virginia, where some of us live and enjoy things. But here, anyway, it's nice to be here.
Where
in
do you
Nashville.
want the casino, Bill?
Yeah.
Just a little closer to your house, is that it?
No, I mean, we fought hard to keep the casino actually out of Virginia, and unfortunately, the Maryland legislature went the other way. Anyway, but enjoy the casino tonight. Don't let me put you off from being here. Anyway, but Principles First is a great success story, and look, it's an inspiring one. It's a heartening one. It's a hopeful one in a pretty dark time often. So I just wanted to begin by saying that. Chuck's forbidden us from quoting Karl Marx, which is a problem for me now that I'm woke Bill Kristol. I usually have a couple of Karl Marx quotes handy, but I'll skip those. Look, I mean, I'm going to be very simple-minded. My red line was Donald Trump, and it was Donald Trump in 2015. And I know you can get deeper conversations about the polarization and the sociological problems we have and divisiveness and all this, but at the end of the day, these problems, in my view, were problems. But they were manageable or could be managed, or people of good faith could figure out how to begin to deal with them, and people were trying to deal with them, to be fair. Trump is it's like being a patient and you have some aches and pains, you have a few injuries, you have some actual conditions that need to be treated that are dangerous, even threatening. Then you get a raging infection in a hospital. And the infection can be deadly, and you need to deal with the infection before you can get back to dealing with the underlying problems and causes. Now, that doesn't mean that doctors, if you think of this analogy, just to torture it a little more, I mean, people need to work on the other things as well. So I'm very much in favor of that, too. But I think as long as you have Trump and Trumpism in the ascendancy, and this is very important, as long as you have one of our two major parties, which at this point controls both houses of Congress, totally acquiescent and enabling Trump and Trumpism, that for me is the danger and the existential threat, and that I think has become more and more the American public's red line. The elites, not so much. They've all figured out ways to go along and get along. Not all. Many of them have figured out ways to go along and get along. But I think that's my. In 2015, I was editing the Weekly Standard. We were not a Republican Party at all magazine. We were a little heterodox, as Pat was saying he was too, on issues. But we were, conservative-ish. And I remember just saying, look, I can't support Trump if he's the Republican nominee. And, how could you do that? You served in Republican administrations and all. And I tried to explain how much of a danger I thought he was to the country. And unfortunately, I think on that I was right.
Brittany, look, you're part of this organization. You worked on the Hill. You were moving up in Republican politics, and this is a tribal town, and so this is not just taking a job. By doing this, by taking this leap, you were basically saying, you were denying yourself, and that's not easy for younger folks. And we've seen the allure of a goal where people will say, well, the ends justifies the means, but you're not doing that. What was your line?
I'd say, similar to Bill, the day that he descended down those golden escalators and called Mexicans rapists and said all of these crazy things. Not that it should matter. I am Hispanic American, I'm Mexican American and Cuban American, but it's just the fact that it was so dehumanizing. I was working on the Hill at the time. I was a press secretary for a freshman member of Congress, and I remember, none of us were fans of this moment, but we were all sort of ogling at the TV, thinking, this is so ridiculous. This guy's never going anywhere, right? And then obviously he did, and I continued to work in Republican politics, including at the RNC during his first administration for a little bit of time, and then went to work on a Senate campaign. And I'll tell you this, is that in Republican politics, and I'll even say now, because now tweets, the likes you can't see publicly. I see you like my thing, you liked my thing, but nobody else does. And so I do get a stray like from someone who probably shouldn't be liking my things every once in a while, who's on the Hill. And that always makes me feel really happy inside. And what I'll say is this, not only obviously the Golden Escalator Day, but I was a staffer for the minority leader at the time of January 6th. Next question is always, were you there? No, I was not there. Staff was encouraged to stay home unless you were staffing him that day, which I was not. It was supposed to be a big protest day. Obviously, we know now the history of what actually happened that day, and it was much more than a peaceful protest, even though some would say they're patriots. Not us in this room, that's why we're here. And not only was that just a complete desecration of the People's House, but as someone who worked there, it also felt like a real personal violation. There were zip ties left in our office. There were cups strewn around because they'd been drinking things, and it just felt like dirty. Like, this is where I spend the majority of my waking hours, is in these offices, and this is what I do to give back to the people, and this is what's really important to me. And I don't do it because of the proximity to power. I do it because I really feel like this is one of the best ways to give back to our communities. And so after I worked for, eventually then, Speaker McCarthy, he was the first speaker to ever be vacated, as I'm sure many of you in this room know, because you like paying attention to politics like me. And then that meant we all lost our jobs. And so it positioned me to say, okay, well, I see the writing on the wall. I wanted Nikki Haley to win the nomination. Obviously, that did not happen. And I said, I'm not going on the record and defending this. It's important to me to have a backbone and actually do and say the things that I mean. And so I sent a cold email to principals first. And I will say, when I first was unleashed from being in the House, I did receive a phone call from, I won't say who, but for someone pretty high level that said, are you sure you know what you're doing? And it wasn't asking me, are you sure you know what you're doing? It was nicely telling me, don't do this. And I said, I'm going to. And I've never received another phone call telling me what to do. So here
Mighty
we are.
fine career there you want, Brittany, right? I always describe myself as short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. I think in 1939, you could have been short-term pessimistic, and by 1946, long-term optimistic. The point being is a lot of bad can happen in the short term, or if you want to take another metaphor, the great Martin Luther King quote, the arc of history bends towards justice, but sometimes an arc has to go backwards before it goes forwards. Bill, you were just in Minneapolis earlier this week, and we were discussing this earlier. Tell me your line of pessimism versus optimism after spending a couple of days in Minneapolis.
So yeah, the Bulwark did a couple of events out there, and it was really moving to be there. We spent some time with the citizens of Minnesota. We went to the Whittle Building and to the memorial sites for Alex Preddy and for Renee Good. Very moving. I talked with people who were involved in both the demonstrations there and the efforts to confront and limit the damage ICE and Border Patrol were doing, but also in the amazing efforts, which have gotten a little less publicity, I would say, to help the immigrants. I mean, there are people, I had dinner Tuesday night when I got out there with some people I knew and then a few friends of theirs, people more my age than anything else, a lot of, ex-McCain Republicans, I would say, and then some, Minnesota liberals, but these were upper middle class people in their 60s and maybe a couple in their 70s who were not professional activists. They had not spent the last 20, 30 years going to demonstrations and whatever, their own politics were.
Are they paid actors, Bill?
Quite moderate. They were, yes, being paid. I mean, wonderful thing. And they were volunteering, and they were, first of all, the organization behind the scenes was extremely impressive. They were bringing meals quietly to immigrant families. They were taking, one teacher at school was using her lunch hour to drive the cars each time, a couple of parents of kids in the school who were worried if they went to the gas station to fill up, they would be harassed, in some cases actually detained by ICE. Some of them are American citizens, some of them are here on valid, what were thought to be valid, green cards and so forth, but nonetheless, ICE does not quite recognize that. And so she was driving their cars to fill up, to refill the gas, and then bringing it back so they could have it. Someone else was meeting the kids at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., coming to a kindergarten, 3 or 4 blocks. The parents would drop her off, give the kid over to this woman I know, who would then walk them to the school because ICE was around the school, had a fair number of Hispanic and other kids, Latino kids, and ICE was there. So I'd say on the one hand, the scale and severity, and I'll say brutality really of what was happening, and I'm not sure, I didn't fully appreciate it until I got out there, just that, the amount of what I said, I see these clips on social media, but it's probably a little better, isn't it? I mean, I'm seeing the worst 10% of what's happening. And a lot of this stuff is more like routine, maybe you don't like it, but kind of, law enforcement. And they said to a person, it's worse than you think, it's not better than you think. And that they want to intimidate everyone. They're looking to break your windows. They're not reluctantly doing it if there's resistance to giving over your driver's license or whatever. So that's A. But the courage of the resistance and the spontaneous organization of it, the public, the governor, I think the elected officials there have done pretty well. But the public was ahead of the elected officials. And final point I'd make is the Minnesotans, when you talk to them, they're very proud of their state, which people often are, but Minnesota maybe a little specially so. And
among the highest turnout always in
always
voting.
the highest turnout.
Always in the 75, 80%.
Sociologists who study it, civic participation, the religious organizations, I mean, networks. It's an unusual state, so let's give them credit for that. But I always sort of pushed back a bit and said, but it could happen in other states. They're not that different from the rest of us. I mean, they're a little crazy to live up there. It's so cold and everything, but I mean, whatever.
Well, the Norwegians, the ones that didn't leave Norway win gold medals, and
How
then
crazy
the others
though.
come to
See,
Minnesota.
Todd's folks ended up in Florida like normal people.
Right.
But anyway, they left Norway. Let's go to Minnesota. That's really going to be a nice change. Anyway, no, but I mean, so they're proud of what they've done, and they should be. But I think there are important lessons for other states, and it did give me heart in that respect. The kind of bottom up, pretty spontaneous, but also pretty well organized, but spontaneously organized, if you know what I mean. The signal text chains, discipline that they've shown. All of that really gave me heart. All people have been, Chuck and I were talking about this before, the sociologists, political scientists have all been saying communities don't really exist anymore in America. Civic society's falling apart. We're bowling alone. There was a famous book 20 years ago, which is actually a pretty good book. But still, we just can't, we're not like we used to be. If you go to Minnesota and see what they've done, that is as inspiring an example, I would say, of community, solidarity, and civic virtue, if I can use an old-fashioned term, as I've seen really in decades, I would say.
So, Pat, your line of pessimism versus optimism, it can feel like a pessimistic moment. I trust the American voter eventually, is what I always like to say. Where are you in the pessimism versus optimism scale?
I'm very optimistic about our Constitution because I still think the piece of paper of our Constitution is stronger than a political party or a president. And I may be different than you, but I do believe that. And I think in the long term, this great experiment will survive. We've gone through much worse than this as a country. And in fact, I don't think we're benchmarking enough.
I'm not ready to say I'm ready to drop the much.
Yeah.
We've been through worse, but I don't know, much worse.
I would compare the 68 riots.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'm saying,
Federal government was not on the side of the rioters.
let me say this. Let me finish. One respectful discussion.
Civil discourse.
Where the short term I'm not confident is in the leadership. I have never seen, this is coming from someone as a mayor and as a governor who's had to make the tough decisions during riots, during 9/11, during ice storms, during hurricanes. I've had to do it. And I've had to work with a governor and a president in these very, very difficult situations. And what discouraged me most about Minnesota and also the California fires is the lack of teamwork and maturity among the leaders. They seem to be all wanting to talk to the base. Even the California fires, the governor and the mayor were not even participating in the same conference, in the same press conferences while people were losing their lives, and they're in the same party. And I'm going, that would never happen among most governors and mayors. And when you have a crisis, it's more important than ever to show teamwork. And what I saw during Minnesota from an outsider looking in, because I've had to deal with some major riots and major police shootings where I've had riots, the last thing that leaders do is don't show that they work as a team. They handle their problems behind closed door, they yell and scream or whatever, but they come out united. And I didn't see that with our president, with our secretary, with the governor or with the mayor to different degrees. But now more than ever, you need to have maturity of leadership, not looking for short-term points, but long-term stability. And before you comment on a situation, get the facts.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying, but I want to sort of channel what I have imagined what some people are thinking here. This isn't a normal, he said, federal government said, state said situation. This is this is where the confrontation is a feature, not a bug, of the situation. So and I think this gets at to sort of the challenge that we're all facing, which is do we have an emergency that we've got to sort of, look, we've got to drop the sort of the normal, you're not wrong about, I completely agree with your comment about California, but it feels small compared to what we're dealing with this administration. Do you see that?
I absolutely, I see total hypocrisy among this administration. And I see a constitutional crisis with Minnesota, for example, and with this tariff situation, where there's total hypocrisy. The Republican Party I joined believe in state and local control and a weakened federal government and say, more decentralization of decision-making. Both parties have completely flipped on so many issues. The voting rights controversy right now, all of a sudden the Republicans are saying, I want strong federal rules and regulations for state control, which is really part of our Constitution. On sending federal troops to Minnesota, totally contrary to what my party used to stand for. And then I see Democrats asking for more state and local control. So we are flipping our policy without admitting that we're flipping our policy, because we're so tied or have this allegiance to a Trump or to our political party, and that concerns me. We're not being honest with ourselves about our hypocrisy.
I just think Tim Walz has not been, I was not a fan of his, honestly, as I told him when he came to the Bulwark event Tuesday, he reminded me. I was not a big fan of him as a VP pick or as a VP candidate, honestly. And I don't know him well, so I have no personal stake in this. Tim Walz has behaved in an exemplary way in Minnesota. He has not been partisan. I mean, he has talked on the phone to Susie Wiles, and this is public. I mean, tried to talk to her every day to try to damp things down, to try to get her to tell the president to pull in Bovino, to stop this kind of insanity, to stop the provocations. And Susie Wiles, and I think Tim said this publicly, would say, look, I'm doing my best, but it's a hard guy to control. I get in the office every morning and I try to fix the mess that was, created the night before. So I just think it's not equal responsibility.
I didn't say it was equal, but I will say this. I'll give you an example, quick. I had to deal with a riot 2 months before my reelection, a controversial police shooting, which in fact there's what we call justified shootings and unjustified shootings. And we had a riot in Charlotte. Media was there for 3 days. I decided, my SBI director said, you've got to call the National Guard. This is the city in which I was mayor for 14 years of. I had a mayor at the time, opposite political party, much more left. She didn't want it. So I worked behind closed doors with her and said, tell you what, I'm going to send the National Guard, but I'm going to hand total authority of my National Guard, because governors command the National Guard, to the police chief, who I knew. I used to ride with him when he was a sergeant and I was a mayor. And I made a deal. I said, behind closed doors, I said, I'm sending the National Guard. Our city's going to burn down. And give full authority of the highway patrol also to the police chief, because you got to have teamwork. Take the politics out of it. And that's what I did. And it worked. Politically, it hurt me. But we did the right thing. We put principle first. And that's the lack of teamwork I'm seeing, is that sometimes leaders have to resolve their differences, not on every hour press conferences to the public, but do like we have to do in business occasionally.
Brittany, other than this giant turnout, which I think is a terrific, optimistic moment, your line between pessimism and optimism, where are you?
Well, you took my talking point because that's what I was going to say, this amazing crowd. But, I would say probably like a lot of folks in this room, I'm concerned about our institutions. I'm concerned about Congress relinquishing their power when we've seen things like tariffs. But then we have a bright light like yesterday, a glimmer with the Supreme Court and their ruling on tariffs. And so I think that is a moment of optimism. And the other thing I'd say is, so I still consider myself a Republican. Words like activism and collective action and organizing have never really been in my vocabulary, and now all of a sudden they are. And I'm really impressed by, even though it isn't necessarily my sort of activism in the past, all the protests that we've had in the country, especially when we're able to keep them peaceful, and because we have the right to do that, and I think Americans exercising that right is one of the most optimistic things in our country right now. And so to you, to your friends who are doing that, continue doing that, because as we've seen, that makes people nervous, and it shows that power and the strength of our voice. And that is, I think, the brightest light in this moment. It's the people, it's the Americans who are not afraid to stand up and have that backbone that so many of our politicians don't these days.
So, well said. To me, there's sort of, there are two issues, and sometimes I'm not sure which we should prioritize at the moment that we've got to do, right? We've got a constitution, we've got a democracy that needs some updating, sort of I call it the infrastructure of democracy, just like our roads and bridges needed repair, the infrastructure, we need to look at partisan primaries, we need to look at a few things. You brought up the issue of Congress. And I often say, I think the root cause of our current situation is the weakness of Congress, really I could argue, since World War II. I mean, the fact is Congress wouldn't deal with desegregation. We had to go to the courts, right? Congress wouldn't deal with reproductive rights. We had to go to the courts. Congress doesn't deal with anything when it comes to everything is always, we've sort of been forced to go to the courts. And yet then I look at, well, is this a Republican Party problem? And the last time the Republicans went down this ideological road of sort of isolationism, nationalism, America first, Bill, it took 5 straight presidential elections for Democrats to win. 5 straight presidential elections till Republicans said, yeah, that's a bad idea. Let's find the war hero Eisenhower. So I guess the question is, the efforts in this room, these folks here all want to fix this republic. Should the focus be on repairing the Republican Party or sort of modernizing the democracy first, whatever it takes, maybe finding an independent, rallying around a unifying Democrat? What is the answer?
So I think actually all these things are important, as you said at the beginning, and people should do what they think honestly is right. Part of civic activism, which I also, like Brittany, have been so impressed by, is people should find the lane that they're most comfortable with, that they believe in, that they're best able to help in. Some of us are better thinkers probably about the long-term structural stuff, or have a background that enables them to deal with it and know the law and so forth, and can think hard about some of these electoral reforms. Others of us maybe a little more in practical politics or in civic activism. So I would say, honestly, I try not to, I get this question, versions of this question a lot, and I'm very, let a thousand flowers bloom in terms of civic renewal, political renewal, trying to save the Republican Party. I spent a lot of time in that, and trying to get Jim Mattis to run and 1 million other people in 2016, and then 2020. It didn't work out. I would just add one thing, though. I also think I myself now consider myself basically, certainly an ex-Republican, and basically in Virginia we don't have party registration, but I voted for Democrats consistently over the last bunch of years. And we have a good Democratic governor, and there was a huge Democratic landslide, and it's not a radical party in Virginia. But I think it's important that we have, in the absence of having 2 responsible parties, which would be the best thing, we should make sure we at least have 1 responsible party. And it sounds amusing, but I'm not joking. It's kind of important, right? And that party's likely to almost certain to win the House. I think could possibly win the Senate. Good chance to win the presidency if there's an unpopular Republican president in 28. Really matters that the Democratic Party be a successful and responsible governing party for at least now, without giving up on the notion that ultimately we can't have a functional country here without having 2 responsible parties. But for me, helping the Democrats do better in some things is an important priority as well.
Pat, you've been a little more active in more of the independent space, and You know, when I think about the moment that I'm guessing broke you inside the Republican Party, it was the way primaries work. You know, I'm a believer. I think taxpayer-funded partisan primaries are unconstitutional. I mean, I'm sorry. The idea, and Bill, I live in Virginia. Also, everybody should be like Virginia. It's no party registration, right? You decide which primary is competitive, and you know that's what I do. I've voted in all sorts of primaries to make sure we get sane people in the general election. But the idea that that is a registered independent, I can't participate in a taxpayer-funded primary unless I join a private club. I believe that's called a poll tax. So I think that's I view getting rid of partisan primaries as probably one of the simplest, best reforms we could do that would be the least controversial. And I'm guessing, Pat, that would be your lesson, but what other ways in the independent and the centrist movement that and centrist is the wrong word. I don't like to use centrist.
I was very active in No Labels. Joe Lieberman and myself and Ben Chavis were co-chair of the No Labels effort, and which did not succeed, but it was a valiant effort. And I'm not going to criticize anyone involved. And Joe Lieberman and Ben Chavis.
Oh, as Bill put it, everybody's
become very close friends. I'm so lucky to get to know him. I'll tell you where I'm at right now is the gerrymandering is absolutely killing politics. And it's not just at the federal level. It's in our cities, counties, school boards, and so forth. So I'm going to talk about everything's Washington-centric as we speak. I come from being a city councilman, mayor, and governor. I think this is going to be a bottom-up process. And I think we need to start with our towns and our cities and our school boards, which are in terrible shape right now. Everyone's, again, focused on what's Capitol Hill's doing, and there's not enough focus on the financial problems at the local, state, and federal, local and state level. And that includes county and city government. And by the way, those are gerrymandered too.
Yep.
People forget city council races are gerrymandered by whatever party's in control. So I would agree with you 100% and agree with Bill that it's all of the above. But I don't want to be so Washington-centric. This is kind of my Reagan conservative, that I believe in the grassroots, and I believe in local school boards and city councils and zoning meetings. That's where the real action is. And I get fed up when I hear college students or other people go, I want to get in politics and be a U.S. congressman. And I told my dad that one time. He said, why do you want to be a U.S. congressman? You have a chance to be mayor of Charlotte where you can make a difference. And he changed my mind. I ran for mayor of Charlotte and was mayor for 14 years. And I made a hell of a lot more difference than I did as one of whatever in Washington, D.C. So I'm looking at it from a grassroots standpoint to make a difference.
You know, just on the primary thing, Pat was too modest maybe to mention this. I mean, he should be the senator from North Carolina right now, except there's a partisan primary in North Carolina. And outside groups, to speak of Washington, came in and spent $10 million against you, dark money against you, and Trump endorsed his opponent. And so North Carolina, which could have had I think a moderate Republican senator who might have stood up to Donald Trump occasionally and to leadership occasionally, might not have voted to confirm all these wonderful cabinet secretaries we now have. That's not been the case. You know? So I think your point about the primaries and the electoral structure, and particularly the primaries, is so important because the gerrymandering is important, but the states haven't been gerrymandered. The states are the same states they were, right, 20 years ago, 40 years, 60 years ago. And the polarization at the state level, in the Senate, that's the House one sort of half expects to be, you know, pretty partisan just because most of the districts are going to be very red or very blue. The polarization, when I got to Washington, I'll just say one fact that fits into Chuck's narrative, in '85, I think there were most of the 26 of the states, the majority, had one Democratic senator and one Republican senator. Yeah. And then there were, I don't know, temporarily a Republican Congress, so there were 14 states with Republicans.
I think we have two?
Yeah, we have two left, right?
Pennsylvania and Maine.
Manchin went away, so West Virginia went away. So Pennsylvania and Maine, we'll probably after this one.
I think that's it.
We might be down to one if Collins loses in Maine. Yeah. And so that's the degree to which this changes the character of our politics. If you have a Senate where most senators have to work with someone across the aisle on all the issues of concern to their state, it has one flavor, you might say, of politics. If you've got a politics where each state has the governor, the 2 senators, the majority of the congressional delegation, often a supermajority because of gerrymandering, the state legislature, all on the same party. It goes in, no, I think Trump has exacerbated this in a huge way, but I do think the structural underlying problem there is real. Yeah.
Brittany, when it comes to Congress, I mean, look, I don't know what it's going to take to get Mike Johnson to read Article 1 of the Constitution. I just wish he read that part of it. And it is amazing to me, but he's not alone, right? We've had so many congressional majorities fear, well, we'll let our president decide the specifics of how this bill is implemented and things like that, and you get to this situation. But every week I notice that there's more members of Congress who have read Article 1. Right, we saw it, and it's, I always say this, every day Trump loses another Republican because every day a line is crossed, the tariff line. We've seen it, and when you give a permission slip to oppose him, and I'm very curious if what the Supreme Court did is going to give a new permission slip to a handful of Midwestern Republicans who realize the farm economy's been destroyed by Donald Trump, to speak out.
Not only do I think that gives them a permission slip, the fact that another point of optimism that I should have mentioned probably is the fact that I am pretty confident, knock on wood, that we're heading into a lame duck presidency, because I do think that Republicans are going to lose the House, which is something that under normal circumstances I would hate to say, but in this moment, we really do need some opposition. And so, I do hope that this continues to give Republicans that permission structure. We've seen it before, and then also we see people go back and capitulate, and I think that one thing that all of us in this room very clearly understand, but Congress seems to fail at recognizing, is that he expects 100% loyalty 100% of the time, but doesn't give any of that back. And we've seen that with people like now former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? And is one of his biggest supporters. And I am no fan of hers, but she was a foot soldier for that president and for that gentleman.
She made the mistake of believing Trump.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have made. And when you're a leader like that, I'm less inclined to totally forgive, as opposed to an American who just believed something because they were told, and they want to have hope and believe the best in our presidents. And so yes, that's where she messed up, number one, I think. But Elise Stefanik is another one, right? She was very moderate Republican. I don't think was a big fan of his. Was part of things like, is it Tuesday Group and all of those sort of caucuses on the Hill, and was for when it was impeachment stuff, and was such a big proponent of his, and then she was going to be ambassador for the UN. Oh, no, actually, we need you here. So then she lost her leadership spot in Congress. It's like, oh, okay, no, well, then I'll find something else. I'll run for governor of New York. It's like, oh, actually, I'm not going to endorse anybody here, right? And so I think that we've seen time and time again, and we know this, and they seem to think, oh, it won't affect me. I'm not me. I'm not the one. I have the loyalty. And then I'm sure it's pretty shocking. So when things like that happen, with the tariff things happen, I hope that Republicans continue to wake up and open their eyes and say, especially as we head into what midterms will likely be, this is really the moment to step up. And I do think that those folks exist, and I hope that they exist in greater numbers soon.
I think with Elise Stefanik, I believe the phrase is karma is a, never mind. Pat, you wanted to jump in and respond?
There is one other issue that I think's our greatest challenge, and that is since Citizens United passed, when I ran for office as governor, the second or third or fourth, I can't keep track of all the elections I've been in, and as U.S. Senator, you don't even know where the money's coming from that attacks you until long after the election is over. And if I don't know where it's coming from, you don't know where it's coming from. And when I started out running for office as city councilman, mayor, big influence was being able to give a $4,000 check. I mean, wow, that was incredible. Now
it only cost $4,000 to get a picture with you?
Yeah.
Now it's $100,000 to get a picture with you, right? Yeah.
But now it's 7 figures. that you have no idea where it's coming from. And the advertisements you're seeing, you know, Citizens for a Better America, Citizens for United Way, or whatever, you have no idea who they're representing and what their interests are. And Bill and I were talking briefly last night. The largest donor in Washington, D.C. in the last 2 years has come out of nowhere. Right. And that's the crypto industry, to both Republicans and Democrats. And by the way, the media makes a lot of money off of them, too. But you have no idea how much that's influencing policy, and it's very bipartisan in the tens of millions of dollars.
Chuck Schumer told Senate Democrats to just get on board that crypto bill because there's $139 million sitting in something called Fair Shake, and they're just going to.
And Trump was against it before he was for it.
Of course.
Just 2 years ago.
But the point is that even it is so overwhelming, the money, to underscore this point, that you've got to pick your spot. You're like, all right, I'm just not going to fight crypto. And you have to like decide, I guess I'll fight this because that's just too much money. I mean, that's insanity. That's insanity.
They spent $100 million even in North Carolina. It's a down payment for a $1 billion return. In fact, it's moving to your state legislators. In Raleigh, my legislature, Republicans, signed by a Democratic governor, signed a crypto bill, which means 5% of the pension program has to be invested in crypto. And it's not even in the newspaper. No one knows it. They signed it without a ceremony. The Democratic governor, who I like, nice guy, signed it with no ceremony. The Republicans passed it with no debate. That does give me a little pessimism.
Yeah, no, the power of money, and it only a constitutional amendment bill, right?
Well, I guess the court could overturn.
But the courts, well, as long as they decide that money is speech, there's only going to be a constitutional amendment.
Where you see it is if you're a member of the Banking Committee, Ag Committee, or Finance Committee in the Senate and House, you are getting a lot of crypto money regardless of political party.
We got about 3 or 4 minutes. I want to land this plane here and sort of look, this is a group here that probably didn't start out as thinking about voting for Democrats. Many of them may vote for Democrats in this midterm year, may do it again in 28 for the same reasons, Bill, you've articulated. How should, if the Democrats get control of the House, and I'm increasingly, history says when you have a situation like this, a presidential approval rating as low as it is, and that the average pickup for the out party is actually 4 Senate seats, which would give the majority. And I actually think I actually think the Democrats only need 3 Senate seats because there's a certain senator in Alaska who I think would vote to organize with the other party if it's a 50-50 Senate. She's all but said she's open to this, and I'm referring to Lisa Murkowski. So, but how should Democrats spend the last 2 years of the Trump administration, Bill?
I mean, it does matter a lot if they control both houses. You know, if they control the House, I think my liberal friends or Democratic friends have been overdoing a little bit how much they can control things if they control only the House. I mean, you can do some investigations. The Trump administration is not going to cooperate with those investigations. They're not going to show up when subpoenaed. The Justice Department's not going to enforce these subpoenas, trust me. They're not going to make documents. If we've seen this with Epstein, I believe they passed by 425 to 1 or something, right? 423 to 1, and then unanimously in the Senate, we got to release everything, no redactions of anyone except the victims. They haven't, and they're not going to. I mean, that's what's striking, right? They haven't. Okay, it's complicated. It's 6 million pages. It takes a while. They weren't ready to do it. They screwed up some things. But you know what a normal administration, even a normal partisan administration, would say is, but okay, we're going to fix it. Give us another month. You know, we'll give us a case by case. They're not fixing anything. It's a good example, though, of the limits of congressional control over an executive that's just willing to ignore the law and ignore normal procedures in terms of being responsiveness in terms of information and so forth. Having the Senate does change the calculus, I think. Don't you think, Chuck? I mean, it just having both houses so much more powerful.
Much different.
You can pass legislation. President can
well, that
veto
is the question.
He can veto it, but then
do you do that, right? Like do you campaign to say, you know what, if I can get Trump to sign X, I'll do it?
I don't think
or
so.
Are we past this month?
We're past that for temporary. But they can't. I mean, the truth is, even so, it's hard. There's a filibuster in the Senate. I mean, it's going to be very hard. every Democrat I know, elected official, wants to campaign on "we can govern better," which is to their credit because they believe in governing better and they care about it. But the truth is, with Trump as president, he's the dominant figure in this country for the next 3 years, not just for the next year. His administration is very purposeful. I don't think they can get Steve Miller fired. They can't get probably Pete Hegseth and maybe they can get individual like Kristi Noem fired. But ultimately, the mass deportation effort, the politicization of the military, these things are going to continue. They can check those things. They can slow down those things. Maybe they can stop some of those things. But I think their basic message has to be, you cannot let this guy continue to
Would
govern
you impeach him again?
for another 2 years, additional 2 years, with a party that's totally complacent. If there were a Republican Party that were behaving normally, even I came here under Reagan, we had vetoes overridden in the Reagan second term. I mean, we didn't have people just going along with everything. They had a Supreme Court justice nominee defeated. I mean, cabinet secretaries withdrawn. So I think the key is to say you cannot afford Trump in a Republican Congress for the last 2 years. We will stop that. Then on the side, so to speak, and at the backbench level, and at the think tank level, and at the civic association level, having a sound agenda going forward that addresses some of these real problems we have in the country, economic, legal, and others, is very important. But I would basically, we need to check Trump.
Your former colleague at the Bulwark is running for Congress to do two things. The first term is to impeach Trump. The second term is to codify the rule of law. And I get that, and it's a no. I get his goal there. Is impeachment, would that be self-defeating?
I can't tell. I mean, the conventional. I don't know. I mean, look, they should do what's right, and it's a little hard to make the case that he doesn't deserve to be impeached. It might also be hard to make the case why do it if it's not going to happen. On the other hand, make the senators go on the record. I doesn't think that's such a bad idea. I would be pretty careful about which charges to bring front and center, make sure they're really airtight, that he's genuinely committed an impeachable crime. Might be a bit of a waste of time. On the other hand, the degree to which everyone is held harmless by what they're doing now isn't healthy. And I don't think one should go around vowing retribution for everyone, but literally people haven't paid a price. And just on the Elise Stefanik thing, just to get, I mean, the truth is one of the most damaging things of the last 7, 8 years is many friends of mine, I'm sure Chuck's too, you're making a mistake signing onto that Trump thing. It's going to not turn out well. You're going to end up getting betrayed. A few have gotten betrayed. Most are doing extremely well. Extremely well. Go to the lobbying firms that are succeeding in Washington. Go to the people at the state level who are getting hired for excessive contracts to lobby the North Carolina state legislature. Everyone has to be, who's paying, who are the defense contractors hiring is there. Every law firm has to, when they have any business with the federal government, one of the first things they do, I was told by someone who's a partner at a major law firm, they have a checklist of things they do. In the old days, it was, we got an antitrust case, we got to get some reputable economists to do a serious study to show there's no antitrust problem. We got to get someone who knows the FTC to explain how we can work that process. There was always a little bit of back scratching and inside baseball. Now it's, we need to have someone who's on good terms with the Trump White House, preferably the Trump family, personally, on our payroll as a consultant or advisor to make sure this deal can get through. So the amount of money that's sloshing around in Trump world, so they have done well. They have done well, and that dynamic has to change, begin to change.
Very quickly, and Brittany, which is, if Republicans get swept out of power in Congress, will we really see will there be an attempt to sort of push back against the Trump wing of the Republican Party going into 28 or not?
I think so, and I don't know if that's immediate. Like, to be honest with you, to get back to where we were or in that way, I think it is going to take some years. I don't think it's an immediate thing, unfortunately. I know that there are folks working behind the scenes to do those sorts of things and prepare for moments like that, and we've heard those stories before, of course. But I think that that would be the right way to go, and for Democrats, if they get that opportunity, I'm not really in the business of giving advice to Democrats, given my history, but I guess my one piece of advice would be, don't just be anti-Trump, be pro-something, and the pro-something needs to be the economy. It needs to be American worker, American families, and I think they just really need to make sure that message is clear to the voter.
Well, we want to just get to 251. Right? We're going to make it to 250. Let's hope we get to 251. Last word, Pat McCrory, your advice if Democrats sweep.
I think you look back at the Gingrich-Clinton time period, and it'll be interesting if we have the maturity in those 2 years where Clinton
Have you met Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I mean,
You didn't let me finish my sentence.
I know, but I'm like,
That's the dilemma.
word maturity, we've been waiting for him to, his mom and dad were waiting for
I
him to
didn't bring
mature.
up Trump's name.
Yeah, all right,
I
go ahead.
said the best case scenario would be to have a Clinton-Gingrich moment where we probably made more progress, where Clinton did it for his own self-interest and Gingrich did it for his own self-interest, and we didn't look toward the next presidential election at the time. I think at this point in time, the presidential election is going to start soon, although the Republicans are in a tough bind. Those in waiting, especially in the White House, don't know when to start their presidential election.
Yeah.
And so we've never been in this type of situation in my party where we have a vice president and secretary of state who are waiting to get the go-ahead. And listen, is the McCrory impact, I'll name it after myself, as you mentioned. When I ran for Senate, we had no idea. I was 30 points up. I had no idea after January 6th that Trump would be still powerful in my party. I thought it was gone. That was my logic. I had a blind spot.
You and Mitch McConnell.
30 points up, and so McCrory impact would be Trump endorsed Ted Budd, who was in third place, and he won by 20-some points. I might as well go on to the Caribbean. And since that point in time, you see good people like Tom Tillis now not running for re-election.
Yep.
By the way, Tom was my Speaker of the House when I was governor. We're losing some good people like Tom Tillis, and I hate to see it. But I'm hoping for maybe a Gingrich-Clinton moment where we actually accomplish something the next 2 years with a majority in one party. But the issue of maturity is,
All right.
seen it.
Well, look, Pat, Bill, Brittany, thank you very much. Thank you. Look, good people, bad people with good incentives will do good things. Good people with bad incentives will do bad things. We have to fix our incentive structures all over the place. Thank you very much.